All right, welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled Poppie. You can check out my website. I guess that is my website. You can check out my serialized novel on my website. You can also just type it into the search of any podcast catching device. Man, I can't think of anything today. One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet is that. If you want to check out my book, it is on Amazon. It is The Ninth Hour. You can follow me on different social media things. I don't really do anything but Instagram, and I don't even like that very much. So if you are trying to find me, well, I'll respond to you if you connect me on Instagram. If I don't respond to you on other social media sites, I'm sorry, I'm not really on those sites. So find me on Instagram, send me a message through there, and you'll probably get a hold of me if I want to respond. Besides that, okay, are we jumping into this? We're going to have the word of the week, and I can't say this word. Some words I can't say. This is a French word. That's why I can't say it. Blame the French. We need a new word. It's an okay word. I like the meaning of the word. The word is hard to say. Entrepreneur. I guess it's not that hard to say. I'm just making stuff up. Entrepreneur. So this is related to this week's episode because you already know the title. An entrepreneur is a person who organizes or operates a business and takes on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. So that is the focus of today's episode, specifically the taking on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. And I guess we're going to jump right into this week's episode. So this week, I'm going to be talking about the fact that if you want to be a writer, you need to be an entrepreneur. And if you're someone who is young, so say you are 14 years old and you're thinking to yourself, man, I want to write for a living, figure out how to be an entrepreneur / businessman, woman, as well. Now, I'm going to actually walk through my mindset toward being an entrepreneur, being in business essentially, from the time I started writing, from the time I got serious about writing. So you get a little bit of my life story. This is a sliver of the whole thing, but this is kind of how I approached writing when I was younger versus how I approach writing today. So I think I've said this before. I started writing seriously around the age of 12 years old. Was I good at writing? No. Did I do any other writing before that? Sure. And I really liked writing before that as well. I actually couldn't read very well. Like it was first or second grade, and then my mom took me out of school, made me read an entire year, and then I came back reading just fine. So if you have a kid who doesn't know how to read well, make them read a lot, because then they'll learn how to read better. Because honestly, reading when you're first starting is difficult. This is a little bit of a tangent. Reading when you're first starting is difficult, and you need to put practice in to get good at it. And it's a very pleasurable thing once you get good enough at it to not notice that you're reading. It's just simple and easy. And it's not something that takes a super long time, and it's going to excel your academic career. It's going to make life easier for you in general, because honestly, I can read something and learn it. If I want to, I can go through something fairly complex. If it's not math, if you're dealing with math, I don't know anything. But if it's not math, and everything is math, so it screws me over. If it's not math, I can go through it, read it, and I can understand it. I taught myself how to juggle by reading a book. Figure that out. Okay, so when I was younger, I read, and I liked writing as well before the age of 12. But around the age of 12, I moved. My family moved, and then I didn't have much to do, so I got into writing. And I'm like, wow, I really like this writing thing. I really want to do this. I want this to be a big part of my life. And that's kind of what set me on the path to writing. So maybe if I didn't move, I would have not been such a big writer. Maybe I wouldn't have put such time into writing. There's a lot of other things that feed into that as well. First, I think I had a higher anxiety level than other people when I was a kid. Also, I'm more of an introvert. So when I was a kid, if you have a high anxiety level and you're more of an introvert, you're not going to go out and try to make tons of friends. You make friends a little more slowly. And in that case, you have to do something to occupy your time, right? Everybody has something to occupy your time. We didn't watch TV as much as the average family. We didn't have a lot of video games or anything like that. So I guess I turned to reading. So maybe it should be the case that in every household you shouldn't have a TV until your kid turns around 15 years old. Because they're time wasters, honestly. And I did a lot more reading and writing. I mean, I did more writing, not reading, if I said reading before. I did a lot more reading and writing and more creative things, and that kind of expanded what I did. When I was a kid and up until I was around 20 years old, something like that, this was my attitude toward writing. When I wanted to just write, and to a certain degree, I still just want to write. Okay, so to be clear, there's still a desire just to write in my mind. I wanted to write. I wanted to send my writing off to somebody. I wanted somebody to say, hey, this is great. Let's do something with it. And all I would do in the process is write and create a book. You're creating a product, essentially. I am just creating that book. I get to create something all day long. I don't have to put any other effort besides writing a story, making that story perfect, and then sending it off, and then just cash, just mountains of cash flowing in. So that was my attitude. And I know why this happens. I know why people view writing in this way, probably younger people especially. Most people, I think, who are just starting out, who probably haven't published a book yet, probably have this attitude. The reason why we view writing in this way is because people get lucky. Very, 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 very few people get lucky. J.K. Rowling got lucky. Some other people got lucky. You may even say that with certain other art forms, they got lucky. I would say that George Lucas got lucky, right? If you are a huge author, it might be the case that you're a phenomenal author. It might be the case that you're a phenomenal writer. In some cases, maybe it's warranted, right? In other cases, you look at these authors who are extremely big. They're huge authors, but they're not these phenomenal writers. And at the same time, being a phenomenal writer doesn't exactly equate you to being the biggest author in the world. If you has anybody heard of Ursula Le Guin? Well, if you're into science fiction, you'll be like, yeah, of course I've heard of her. She's a really, really big science fiction author. But if you are in the general public, you haven't heard of her. So she's a very, very good writer, but she probably hasn't made as much money as some other authors like George Martin, who wrote that one thing that's a show now and stuff, Game of Thrones, or other people like that. Maybe other books that have gotten really big fairly recently, is that one thing with, man, I can't remember. It's there's 3 books. Catching Fire is one of them. You know what I mean. Get it? That got really big. She made probably more money than Ursula Le Guin. She's not as good of a writer. The author of... I'm sorry, I'm really blanking on this, and I shouldn't be blanking on it because I've read the book. I don't know. Things go in my head. Things go out of my head. I can't recall them when I want. So my attitude... So people get this idea that you send in a book to somebody, and what happens is they take the book, and it's your first book, and they're like, oh man, we can make a lot of money off of this. So whatever publishing company publishes it, it gets out to everyone, and everybody loves the book. But that's not true. All you have to do to see that not being true is go into any library or bookstore. How many of those books do you actually know? How many of those books do you actually know? But the thing is that people focus on the most salient thing. They have this idea that authors write something, it gets sent out to a publisher, boom, you're making $60,000 a year from that one book. Bam. Or you're making $100,000 a year from that one book. Maybe you're shoveling in millions of dollars from that one book. It does happen to some people. Now, if it happens to you, great. If it happens to you, great. I think the chances of it happening to you are better than if you're winning the lottery, because the lottery is pure chance and you actually have to have some skill if you're writing. But I still think it's a bet, right? You are not going to be on the top. It's the same thing with, I think, a lot of different creative fields. There is a lot of what do you call it? There's a lot of competition at the top. Everybody wants to be at the top of a creative field. But at the same time, there's only enough room for a certain amount of people. There's a rule. There's a rule. I don't know if it's scientific. I don't know if it's just an observation that things are distributed unevenly. So like 20% of the world has the most wealth, maybe even less than that. 20% of, maybe it's like 5% or something like that, or 1%. Let's just say 1% of the world has the most wealth, 1% of writers get the most people reading them, 1% of people who make movies sell the most movies, etc. 1% of this does that, 1% of the clothing companies sell the most clothes. Something like that. So there's an uneven distribution, and it's unlikely that you're going to fit into that very small percentage. I don't know if it's 1%. I'm using it as an example. But if you've ever heard of it, where there's a very small percentage of people who get a lot of stuff coming to them. There's a verse in the New Testament in the Gospels, which I always think of a lot, which is kind of discouraging if you're on the bottom, but it's I don't know if how it's written, if it's meant to mean this, but what it is to those who have will be given more, to those who don't have, even what they have will be taken from them. More recently in my life, that's come to kind of be a proverb. It's like, oh, if you have a lot of stuff, it's easier to get more stuff. If you have a lot of fame, it's easier to get more fame. You can really notice this with people who have become famous, especially with people who are famous. If you are famous, you can get somebody to write a book for you, or you can write a book for yourself, and all you have to do is you call up the publishing company and be like, hey, I'm Robert Downey Jr., I want to write a book. And that publishing company is going to be like, yeah, we're going to let you write a book because you're Robert Downey Jr. All right, we'll take you on because we can make money off of you. And then Robert Downey Jr. gets more and more and more money. If J.K. Rowling wanted to make a movie, right? She has a lot of control in those movies. If she's like, hey, let's make a movie called Fantastic Beasts, you know what's going to happen? The production companies are going to be like, all right, let's do that. But the truth is that that's not how it works, okay? But I had that attitude too, and since you see that everywhere, and since you're like, this is my favorite author, and my favorite author's doing so well, then you're suddenly like, well, that must be the case with most authors. Everybody's reading 10 books. That's the truth. It's not exactly 10. Everybody's reading 10 books. They don't read the millions of books probably that come out a year. I bet you maybe it's not 1 million books. Maybe there's only 500,000 books that come out a year in the United States, okay? Which is still a lot. But you don't have time to read 500,000 books, okay? So I had that attitude that I was going to write books and I was going to send them off to somebody else, and then I was going to make money off of them. It's phenomenal. I was going to write no matter what. That's kind of my idea. I was going to be like, hey, I'm going to write no matter what, and it'd be awesome if I sent money off to people and they sent me money back and I could just keep on writing. That's still the dream, right? I don't see why that can't still be the dream. But as I got older, so if you don't know already, I actually self-published my books, but I'm going to get to that in a second. As I got older, there came about this thing called self-publishing because of the internet getting bigger and different things like that. And some people made it really big because they fit. The guy who wrote those Aragon books or whatever they're called, he kind of got lucky because he was in a specific niche. The lady who wrote 50 Shades of Grey got lucky because she was in a specific niche, and that niche was ebooks. And that niche was there were barely any other books on the market, and that's why those two got big. Because the kid who wrote Aragon, the first book is not written well. Okay, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I was in high school, I tried reading the first book, and there's a certain amount of you have a certain ability to ignore the writing, and I have even less of an ability to ignore writing these days, but you have a certain amount of ability to ignore writing, and I couldn't ignore the writing. It just got too much in the way, and I'm sure he had really great ideas. I'm sure it was great, but the writing got in the way. So I don't think he would have gotten it published, but he was able to get into this niche of e-publishing before anybody else got there. If you can, here's one piece of advice for being successful in some area. Get there before everybody else does, because if you can get somewhere before everybody else is there, before it gets flooded, then you can have a better chance of being successful in that area. You're looking for a small pond that is going to get huge. And if you can get a foothold in that small pond right away, you can grow as that pond grows. So up until I graduated college, I was writing a book in college. I was planning it, and I wrote it after college or at the end of college. I was thinking, I'm never going to self-publish. And I did more research, and I kept on looking into it. And the good thing is that I had a long time after school where I was writing a book and looking into how I was going to publish it and how it was going to work. And I discovered that for a lot of writers, they're actually working more than one job. If you have the opportunity to not work more than one job as a writer, that's awesome. I think it's great for you. I'm really glad. Most writers are working a job, and they're also writing. So think about that. They're writing books on the side, and for a lot of them, they're writing fiction, and they might love doing that, but they're not getting a lot of reward for it. So little plug, support your authors who are working and doing stuff on the side. I figured that out. The second thing is I figured out the process, and I think I've explained this before. So let's just say you write a book, and you can get that book done. Let's just say you can go really quickly. You can get that first draft done while you're working on something else. You're working in a different job in a year. Okay, you can get the first draft job done in a year. Now what you have to do is you have to go out to an agent. Okay, you have to go out to an agent. Let's say you're really, really lucky. So you took a year to write the book. That's one. Let's just say it only takes 6 months to get an agent. I don't even know if that's realistic. I'm lowballing it. 6 months to get an agent. Okay, great. You got an agent. Now that agent's job is to get you a publisher, get you connected to a publisher. Let's just say that takes another 6 months. We're up to 2 years right now of the process of a book. Okay, and I'm lowballing this, and I'll give you some more numbers in a second. Now, let's just say it takes about a year for that publisher to get everything going. Well, it's been 3 years, okay? 3-year process. Your book is finally out. It looks nice and clean. They put your book on the shelves, and let's just say your book is on the shelves for 6 months, okay? And then they take them off the shelves because you're not making enough money, and they're like, okay, we're done with this book. Let's just say you sold... I'm going to actually have to do some math for this, honestly. Let's just say the book was $20, okay? Let's just say you sold 1,000 copies of that book. And this is where this is where it gets fun. Now, I don't know if it's likely that you're actually going to sell 1,000 copies of a book, but how much do you think you'd make? You're like, well, I sold 1,000 copies. I should get about $5 per copy. You make about 3%, somewhere around there. So you're making about $1,200 for writing that book. It's over the course of 3 years. If you cut that into chunks, you're making about $400 a year from your book. Okay, now that's one book, and you're like, okay, that took a long time. If you would have put your energy into doing something else for the hours you spent working on your book, you could have made more money over the course of those 6 months. And now I don't even think it's the case that most people, maybe you are selling 1,000 copies in 6 months, but it's more likely that you took 2 years to write your book, took about a year to get an agent, that's 3 already, took about a year to get a publisher, that's 4, took another year to get it out, that's 5 years, you're making $1,200, and maybe you're on the shelves for 6 months, maybe you're on the shelves for 6 weeks, okay? Could be the case. It's the publisher's deal now. Right? After you send that book off, it is not your book to control anymore. You've made a deal with a publisher. The publisher is going to do what they want with the book. And you've written it, sure, but they are the one making it into a product. Does that make sense? They are the one making it into a product. And I'm usually talking more philosophical, but I just want to make people aware of this as younger writers especially. And I think if you're an older writer, if you aren't making tons of money, you're probably realizing that you have to do this. Now, when I looked at that, I'm like, oh, that's a raw deal. Well, there's this thing here, this ability to publish ebooks, and with Amazon, you can actually make physical copies of books now, and I can do this for free, and I can have it up as long as Amazon exists. And even if Amazon goes down, it's likely that there's going to be other situations and other places that are going to allow me to do this. Okay, so I started to think, okay, maybe I should publish by myself, because what is the stigma with self-publishing? Well, it's not done well. Things don't look good. Things aren't done professionally. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it professionally. I'll do it as close to professional as possible. And then I will be done with it. And then I'll have a book out. And that's what I did. And if you read my book, you may run into an error here or there. It is professionally copy edited, and I still have I'm still making edits on that, but I do have the cover is done by a professional. The editing's done by a professional. So after I put it out, I'm like, okay, then I have a product out, and I've done it as close to professional as I'm capable. And when I got it out, I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. Now, after I got the book out, I realized something. I'm like, well, this book isn't going to just sell itself, because the reason why it's not going to sell itself is because the reason a publishing company that's really big can sell something is it's got a lot of money and weight to throw around. First of all, the publishing company has specific, what do you call it? It has the esteem. It's been around for a while. People know its name. If you're Robert Downey Jr., and you decide that you want to write a book and you do exactly what I do, you're going to have a lot easier time selling that book because of the fact that you have such a big name. You could what he could do, let's pick on Bobby right here. What Bobby could do, because whatever, is he could go and he could write a book, and it could be a crap book. It'd have stupid ideas. It could whatever. And let's just say he takes his stupid ideas and he makes them look good. Like he has a professional copy editor, he has people fixing his mistakes, etc. He has somebody professionally do the cover, and let's just say he throws $5,000 at it, very, very low, and he decides that he's going to put it out. Well, he all he could do is he could tweet. He'd be like, "Hey, just put a book out. I'm actually self-publishing. I think it's really the way to go," and boom, he'd be making money from it. It goes back to what kind of seems like a proverb: those who have will be given more. Those who don't have will, even what they have will be taken from them. Because he has that fame already, he can leverage it. Well, big publishing companies have that fame already, so they can leverage it. And also they have money too, which means that even if you don't know about the publishing company, they can get things out in front of your face. Okay? They can make it look cool. Production companies for movies, what they can do is they can create a movie. There's a lot of movies on the market that aren't so great right now. You just watch them, you're like, meh, right? And I think most people agree with that. I think most people agree that most movies on the market aren't that great. They're not something you walk away from and be like, whoa. They have really high production quality, but they're not something you walk away from where you're like, whoa. But what they do is sometimes, in the case of Star Wars, they use their past performance. They use the hype from the past to sell it. So what they do is they hijack Star Wars, they create another movie from Star Wars, and then they have like, oh, another Star Wars movie, the saga continues, etc. Oh, this is The Force Awakens. That's what they did with that. Realize that's what they did. What George Lucas was doing from the end of the end of the first trilogy to 1999 is he was selling the rights. What they were doing is they were leveraging his ideas and what people already knew to be like, whoa, I love Star Wars so much. So because people love Star Wars, they would buy these products from people who were not George Lucas, who were not the original creator. Okay, what Robert Downey Jr. would be doing is he'd be leveraging his fame to sell books if he was going to create a book. When production companies get things out in front of you, this is why production companies or movie makers borrow a lot of stuff or steal wholesale steal ideas from writers. I mean, I guess the writers get royalties, but the reason why they want to use those things is because movies are a huge investment. You're spending millions upon millions of dollars on movies. I don't know if I said that right. I don't know what that means exactly, but you're spending millions of dollars on movies. You're making Lord of the Rings. I'm going to actually check. 1 second. Okay, I've got the numbers for Lord of the Rings. This is nuts, right? Most people cannot even fathom this amount of money. The Lord of the Rings, that's not it. Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, spent $93 million dollars to make. Okay? Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, spent $94 million to make. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, spent $94 million to make. Okay? Altogether, that totals that's like $360 million. Wait, 180. It's $260 million, somewhere around that. About almost 270, I believe. I think it might be like 275. $275 million to make. The reason why they could put so much money toward it is because that was already a long-standing story. Okay? There was a huge fan base. You don't think of Lord of the Rings having this fan base because it's a little older, but Lord of the Rings had a huge fan base over the entire world. By the time they started making the movies, there was at least about 40 years, maybe 35 years to build that fan base. It was a world-renowned story. It was translated into a whole bunch of things. The same thing happened with the Harry Potter movies. There was a huge fan base. She sold tons of books. When I was a kid, that was a story kids read, and they grew up with that story. Okay? The reason why they can do that is Lord of the Rings has a big name. The reason why, and that's why they steal stuff. That's why they take stuff from authors. Because the authors have already made it, it's not that big of a risk. I've already talked about this. You are a bigger risk as an author if you've never written anything before. You are a bigger risk as an author, even if your book is awesome, because they need to know they can sell that book. This is why this goes against the idea that you should write what you want to write. So I had the rule, write the book you want to read. That was possibly my last rule. Have a bad memory, honestly. Write the book you want to read. Well, if you're going according to the markets, you should write a book that's very similar to everything else on the market. But I'm not going according to the markets. I am actually trying to find that little pond that's going to grow big. This is the same thing with investments, right? If you are an investor, what you do is you try to predict the future. You try to look for those areas that are going to be bigger, that are going to make an impact on people, that are going to explode, essentially, within your lifetime, hopefully. You're looking for those areas that you're like, hey, I'm taking a bet on this. If you want to make money on writing and you want publishers to like you, write stuff that other people that has already been out. Write things that are similar to other things that are out. In my opinion, this is an opinion, if you want to actually make an artistic impact, write something that nobody else has written. Write something that's different. But to do that, you have to approach things differently in almost every single case. It might be the case that you get really lucky, right? You might just get lucky. But I don't like to stand on luck because you never know what's going to happen. You like to be able to control things. To be able to control things as a writer, you have to be an entrepreneur. Going back to that definition, I'm just going to read it again because I have a bad memory and you need to hear it again. A person who operates a business or organizes a business that takes on a greater than normal risk, financial risk, in order to do so. There's an author I know of, and I'll just say his name. So he wrote true crime. His name's Andrew Klavan, and I heard something from him where he was talking about being an author. And what he said is that when you go into the arts, it's not a financial risk per se to go into the arts unless you are almost penniless, right? If you don't have any financial backing at all, for me, it's not as big of a financial risk. It might be for somebody else. For me, I'm always going to try to make sure I have something else going on as long as I know I'm not going to make money off of what I'm writing. So I think most people are thinking the same as me. They'll have their day job, they'll write on the side, and then they make goals for their writing. For me, I want to write 2 books a year until I die, and hopefully that turns into something financially feasible, right? So most people, I think, they have a job and they're financially stable, so it's not a financial risk to write. But what Andrew Klavan, the author of True Crime, what else did he write? A True Crime is the biggest one. True Crime was a movie, a book he wrote. See, they're stealing the ideas of authors. He wrote the book, and then Clint Eastwood made a movie out of it. So that's actually his book. But he said that if you're an artist, if you're a writer, specifically an author, if you want to be an author, you're gambling your life in a way because you're throwing yourself into it and you don't know if you're going to ever get the time back. You don't know if you're ever going to get the time back. So if you really want to do it, you're first of all, if you are started and you've decided on it and that's what you want to do, then you are making a risk. You're gambling your time. There's more than one type of currency in the world. There's more than one type of money or thing you spend stuff on. You spend your time on something. You can spend your time trying to build a business, right? Now you're going to possibly get more money from that business, or you could go bankrupt with your time and you'll have to start over and you've lost time. You spend your time on people. And it could be the case that those people, if you've ever seen It's a Wonderful Life, I'm going to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but the movie's been around since the 50s, I think, so it's about time that you've seen it. If you've ever seen A Wonderful Life, it tells a story about a guy who he doesn't make any money during his life. The reason why he doesn't make his money, and there's people who argue against this from like a banking perspective. So he runs a loan company, and what he does is he is trying to help out the people in his community. And so what he does is if somebody isn't able to pay their loan, he allows them to still live in the house because he helps people build houses, right? He gives them a loan so they can build a house and then they pay him back. What he does is he doesn't make any money because he's too kind. He's too connected to the community. He doesn't want people to lose their homes. And when people are in hard times, he allows them to stay in the homes, and then they are able to build equity in the homes. If you don't know what equity is, it's paying off your loans. They're able to build equity in the homes. They're kind of able to build some wealth for the future generations in their family. They're able to kind of build a foundation for their family. So he ends the movie. The movie ends, and again, I guess you can stop playing this or you can plug your ears if you want to. The movie, the big conflict in the movie is that they lose $20,000, and this is 1950. So I don't know if it's like over $100,000 or whatever it is. I don't know the conversion or the inflation, but I'm assuming it's crazy a lot. I think it's probably like $200,000, $250. That's just a guess, though. He loses this money, or his partner, one of his workers loses the money, and then the bank examiner comes, and the bank examiner is like, oh, you're short $20,000, this huge amount of money in 1950. And he decides he wants to kill himself. But then it's like a Christmas Carol, where he gets to see how things will change, how things will be if Scrooge continues to live his life how he does. What happens in this movie is he's taken out of the picture. It's like you've never been born, and it shows how his life would have been if he had never been born. And it shows in the movie that he consistently gave to other people in different ways. He was able to help that community. He completely changed this one person who was very generous with his time and pretty much said, hey, I'm pretty much giving up my life for everybody else. He wouldn't let anybody else fall. What he did is he changed the face of the community. He got to see what his life was if he had never been born, and everything was worse because he contributed so much. He had such a big impact. And at the end of the movie, he's short $20,000. And then everybody from the community comes in and they pay off his debts. And the reason why they pay off his debts is because he was investing in a different way than what you think. He was investing with his time into people. And it paid off in the end for him because it's a story, but that's the same idea. So when you become an author, when you decide that you're going to do this, you are deciding to invest. You are deciding to risk your life. Any type of investment is a risk, right? If you invest your time in a person, you're going to. It might be the case that person just screws you over. It might be the case that person completely wrecks your life, right? And it happens. If you invest your time in writing, it might be the case that your writing goes nowhere ever. It might be the case that you are the biggest thing in the world. It might be the case that you just make a meager living off of it. Okay? But it's a risk. And so you've already jumped into the entrepreneur pool. And that's what I'm saying. So as I published my book, and I guess I have 2 books now, but just one is in progress and I put out one serially. As I published my book, I figured out, hey, you know what? There's a lot more to this than there's a lot more to creating a book than just creating a book. You actually have to sell it. And I started to view the book differently. I started to view the book as a product. And I'm like, hey, I have this product. I need to sell it. So I need to act differently. For authors, this is hard, generally, because most authors are introverts. Most introverts do not want to sell things. I never wanted to sell things in my life. I never, ever wanted to sell things in my life. I was kind of like, you have this idea of a pacifist, and the pacifist is, I will not fight in a war. But what that pacifist does is they let other people fight in the war for them. So it's like, okay, you're not going to fight in the war, but these other people are going to give up their lives for you. So you gain something because you actually don't want to do something, because you are morally against it. And there are certain things that I think that you should be morally against, but we're not talking about morals right here. We're talking about writing. So I would write a book, and as soon as I wrote that book, and as soon as I wanted people to read that book, I turned it into a product. Okay, as soon as I finished that book, or as soon as I was like, yeah, I want people to read my book and I want to make money off my book. If you want people to read it, if you want to make money off your book is automatically a product. Now, you can go the publishing route and you can get a publisher and you can go that way. That's fine. Go ahead, do it. But as soon as you do that, you're turning it into a product. And if you take on the role of someone who's self-publishing and decides to go out on their own, you are selling that book. You're the one selling that book. And that's where you need to start. So you need to have this attitude that you actually have to do something different than how you've done something before. I'm very comfortable writing. Honestly, I could work on a book. I can write like 6 hours at a time if I'm just writing. If that's my daily thing, I can write 6 hours a day. Seriously, I've done it. I can write 6 straight hours a day, and then I can work on other parts of the book, which means I could get a book done really quickly. But if I want to, so I'm very comfortable in that sphere. I'm the happiest times in my life I found is when I can create. But the thing about it is that I'm already comfortable. And I've already talked about this over and over and over again. As a writer, you need to get out of your comfort zone. So for me, even right now, as a writer, I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone. It's really, really hard. It's really hard to be an entrepreneur. It's really hard to be someone who says, hey, I'm not just going to write this book. I'm going to try to get this book going. I'm trying to build a platform, right? You're trying to get people to know who you are. You're trying to get people to know your books and like them. You're trying to find the people who like your stuff, and that might take years to do. But so you could rely on somebody else finding stuff for you, but you are in control, right? If you decide to go this route, you're the one in control, which is a big burden on your back, because it might be the case that you fail, right? It might be the case that you fail. And if you fail once, that's not that big of a deal, honestly. If you fail 10 times, that's not that big of a deal. If you fail 50,000 times, you might be getting fairly old and you might want to switch just because you want to hedge your bets. I don't know. It's your own choice. But you might fail in the end. There's a chance that you could fail in the end. But here's the thing. It's your book. It's your writing. And you probably are connected emotionally to your writing more than anyone else because you wrote it. So you're the one who might see the most value in your writing. And it could be the case that person in the publishing company or whoever's in charge of marketing your book, they're just like, yeah, we're doing this marketing. And they don't really see what it's about. They don't really see why you wrote it. They don't really see the things in it that you tried to get across to other people. One thing I've noticed with my book is not everybody likes it, right? And I don't think everybody's going to like it. I really don't think everybody's going to like it. There's going to be some people who love what I do, and there's going to be some people who hate what I do. But I like my book, right? And I know who I am to a certain degree. So if I can connect to other people who are like that, then perhaps I can actually connect to a lot of different people who will like my book, and maybe I can be more of a success. The reason why I'm saying is that you're in control of what's going on with your book. You are the one putting in the work. Yeah, it's going to take more work, but you are able to hedge against that risk that you've taken on yourself, right? It's still a risk. Writing is still a risk, even if you go through a publishing company. Most people, that's the thing about life. If you go and have a regular job, unless you work for the government, unless there's a coup, right? So if you work for the government, the only time you're going to probably lose your job is if you're really, really terrible. You can be mediocre. Or if there's a coup in the government, or the government just completely collapses. Even with a coup, you probably will keep your job, depending on what it is. In a regular job, there's still a risk. Somebody took a risk. In a regular job, you could lose it. They could have cutbacks, the economy could go down, whatever. So even if you're in a regular job, you think you're good, but it's not necessarily the case. You just haven't put the time and energy in that another person has to take on that risk, to hedge against that risk. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support me more, what I would ask you to do is that you go to iTunes and you leave a 5-star review. That is something that really, really helps me and helps push the podcast out to different people. And it's something that doesn't cost you much time at all. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. If you ever listen to this podcast and you have questions or you have topics you would like me to cover, you can send those to me and I'll look them over and I'll see which ones I think I can cover intelligently. And if you just want to reach out for anything at all, you can do that as well. Thanks for your time. My name is Daniel Poppy, and as always, this is How to Write Good.